In Bill Ryan's 2005 book, Governance is Leadership, Reframing the Work of Nonprofit Boards, has helped transform the way nonprofit institutions approach governance. He has also taught for 15 years in executive education programs at the Kennedy School at Harvard, as well as in programs for leaders in higher education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Bill brings with us today a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School and a bachelor's from Columbia University. Please help me welcome Bill Ryan.
Good morning. Great to be here with you. This is let's just acknowledge this is the part of the program where you're wondering, what was I thinking when I signed up for a day and a half of board formation on a Monday in spring? But we're about to find out. I heard yesterday was a great start for those who were here, and I'm glad to be here with you this morning because I am, in fact, I did turn out to be someone, thank you, who is deeply interested in the way we govern nonprofit institutions. So that makes one of us who's very pleased to be here for a morning exploring these issues. Just to give you a sense of our game plan, what I want to do is kind of share a framework that I think will provide a way for us to look at the work you're all committed to doing, deeply committed here for a day and a half to get even better at it. And explore some of the practical implications of it. So I hope a healthy balance of concept and practice, and we'll take some opportunities since we're here in tables to kind of process some of the ideas in table conversation, and plenty of opportunity for Q&A as well. But I wanted to start out before we get into frameworks and practices, just acknowledging we're all probably bringing our own mental models about boards into the boardroom. And just a quick exercise to get us thinking here. One way of disclosing or finding out what your mental model is just simply this analogy exercise. I'll go easy, no cold calls. People are welcome to call out if you have a response to this. And this is something you could try at home in a safe board retreat setting, and it does kind of get us in touch with, okay, how do we think about boards? You can think about that. Greatly call out if you like. I brought along some of the most common answers I've collected to get us going with this, and some of these may have occurred to you. Two things as you take these responses in to notice, and two things I want to challenge as we move along this morning about many of our go-to images about boards. Number one, and this responds exactly to one of the quotes that Patrick mentioned from the book. One is we tend to think of boards as singular. So it's a coach or a pilot or a captain, and of course boards are open. And that is both their greatest asset and one of the challenges we face. How do we get a group to govern well? How do we leverage the wisdom of a group effectively? So we'll explore that. Another thing to notice with a lot of our go-to images, they tend to be kind of command and control. So the brain thinks it up in the organization, the heads of school, the administrators, passive instruments that go through. Or that the coach will have the thought and communicate the plan to the team, etc. And of course, boards are the ultimate arbiter on the big questions and are ultimately responsible for their organizations. And also not a great template for governing and leading well to be using that formal command and control. So I want to explore, what does it mean to have a board that really owns its power, accepts the responsibility entrusted to it, doesn't shirk it, and also it has a collaborative relationship with the head of school, with the senior leaders of an institution. So we'll kind of touch on these things as we go. And then I brought, if anyone's at a point of distress in their life with boards, these are also collected at some workshops along the way from those who were struggling. And each one of those has a story. I remember we won't do a pop quiz again Monday. who said what about their boards, but you get the picture. So I want to go through a framework in two parts. One, I want to just think broadly about board value, and two, just really kind of dive into governing. And we can get going with board value. Here, I'll gently rouse you from your slumber, and you can reflect in table conversation for a minute on this, just to get us going to imagine a scenario in which your board didn't exist or function for whatever making this 2 years. What would the consequence be? This is a way for us to kind of go through the back door to thinking about the value your boards created. So just take a moment to get your thinking going at tables. We'll take just 3 minutes to compare notes. What would happen in your own institution if your board suddenly weren't functioning? What would the consequences be? Have at it at tables. All right, let's do the wrap up that last insightful thoughts. And let's get a feel. Get a feel thinking backwards as we are of board value by imagining what would happen if your board didn't exist. Let's get a feel for what was about like. Who wants to share something you shared at your table, or someone is being voluntold by a colleague. And I'll translate. Yeah, well, I'll work with this a bit, and then we'll see how tired I get of this. And then we'll just go back to me talking all the time. Yeah, great.
I think for me as head of school, the biggest vacuum that I would have if there was not a board was not having really qualified thought partners for me as the head of school. You know, we like to think we can do all, but we can't. And so we do need those thought partners with expertise in particular areas. I would say particularly finance to help us move forward and to continue to make the ministry viable for the future.
Correct answer. Yes, there is no such thing as a wrong. In this room, there is a wrong answer. I too went to Catholic school, so I know what it's worth. This is great. So thought partnership for a head of school. We'll see what you say in the private heads of school breakout group later. Let's get a couple more thoughts. How about over here? Anyone in this neck of the room while I'm over here? You can shout it out. Here we go. Great. On the mic.
Are you in school? What we talked about is the ability to really partner. And if you're losing that for 2 years, we definitely have momentum. We have consistency with the diversity we have on our particular board, and couldn't imagine going 2 years. We felt that during COVID, we felt separation. Yeah, we could see each other on the screen, but there was definitely a difference. So we felt like that's the momentum we have now coming out of COVID. It would be a loss.
Great. So more on the partnership theme. What else? Or would anyone like to say nothing would be lost? I would save a great deal of time. Where they get so say, but also where do we answer questions? When are we going to get to money? Yes.
So I think if you pick the right headmaster, or now I guess president, you got to get the titles correct, and you've set the course properly in the past 2 years, you can actually go a very long time without having another board meeting. Because you do it all with phone calls and what have you. I don't think the board actually makes that many decisions in our case. We vote on a few things during the year. It's mostly input that could be done without a meeting.
Yeah, okay, this is refreshing. We have one vote for canceling your boards. You'll get you out of here by 11. And there won't be another board forum. You know, I think there's one of the points you raised too, which is good. If you have set a good foundation, I think is a premise in what you said, and you have set the course, I think, were your words. You know, how often do you need to be engaged collectively as a board with those issues? So let's ponder that as we go along.
Well, I'll try a different angle. That's as a board member. And what I saw also during COVID is relationships deteriorating. You become less informed and you become less interested and kind of drift away. But I think the relationships amongst board members, staff, or whatever, are one of the most important reasons why you can continue to be.
Yeah. So keep those relationships going. And we want the relationships to, I mean, of course, they have value in their own right, but also be in service to the work. So one, you can keep mulling this, but I just want to introduce a little bit of language in this first framework. We could think about 2 types of value the boards are providing generally. Supporting, which are kind of, each of you has this board with an array of individuals on it, and they are often contributing tangible resources. So those could be fundraising. Those of you who forgot, I see there's a 115 boards for an advancement session you may want to go to. But fundraising, providing tangible support to the school, doing outreach, being a champion for the institution and its mission in your networks. These are generally considered the duties of nonprofit board members in the US, at least the way we've built it. And also to be kind of a roster of pro bono consultants. Right, so we got right off the bat in our first comment from the head of school saying, you know, particularly on finance, good to have people whose skills complement mine or can backstop, you know, gaps or enrich the assets we have on the group. So you want to be thinking about these tangible assets. By the way, I'll do a little meta commentary as we go along, so you have a good mix of helpful, practical things and irrelevant punditry. But interestingly, in the US, we have come to rely on boards heavily for this supporting function. And this is why nonprofit boards that have tended to become so big over the years. If each person is providing money and outreach and advocacy and might help as an expert, why not have more? And so you see boards getting a kind of bigger and bigger in many sectors, which then interferes in some ways with their ability to deliver on their second type of value, which is governing, where the board really is not just a list or a roster of helpful, committed individuals who are ready to pitch in, but it's a collective, deliberative body that's really working with the student leadership and in our context this morning to set the course of the organization, to provide oversight and make sure you're headed toward your chosen goals, and then to figure out, again, we can go back to the thought partnership idea, figure out with school leadership how to make course corrections if you're not kind of going as you had hoped. And these two are generally sweep up most of what we want from nonprofit boards. We had a couple of comments also that hinted at the kind of community built in the boards and the boards with their leadership. And of course, that's a bonus. Now to convert this into a little diagnostic, so I put you could plot your board according to how much of each of these types of value it's attending to or delivering. So governing on the horizontal, if you're doing very little of that, your board's over on the left, and then you could map the supporting. I mean, how much tangible stuff is our board doing from low to high on the vertical, and yet different scenarios. So if the board's doing neither, you're down there and lagging. You've seen enough of these 2 by 2. You know you don't want to be in that corner, and indeed, no one in this room coming to a board formation workshop is in that corner. Upper left, interesting place to be. Board's active. We'll pick up the phone to hear from a head of school or CEO or whatever. We'll pitch in with a chat. Maybe do some outreach. I can make that connection, do that call. So very busy, could be very productive, but only in the supporting function. So not yet growing. Now we're well past this with SND and SNDdeN institutions, but this is common for startup organizations. If you're really served any in your other board travels, because there's a lot to do early on to get going. People are more focused on how do we get it done, who's going to hire the accounting firm, who can go network and find us this type of free help, less about where are we trying to get, are we truly doing on track. Over down lower right, guiding, perfectly respectable place to be, because that means you're governing, you're on the right, which you as a board, of course, ought to be doing, but not so involved in providing tangible support. This is generally a place most nonprofits can't afford to be, unless you are literally a foundation charged with giving your money away, and you don't need your board to raise more of it or to, kind of pitch in with back office functions or supplement staff capacity. So that could be a legit place, but for most of our institutions, we need to be in that upper right. And this is one of the things I just offer this as a opening framework for us to think about kind of where are we on this grid today? What stands in our way from getting as high up in the upper right quadrant as we could possibly be. So we'll think about that as we go. And then just to note, you could think back on your table conversation about what came to mind easily. What we heard in the commentary, which was very encouraging to me, were issues about the board's governing function. Being a thought partner, figuring things out, enriching the perspective of the school leadership to get a bigger picture. So that's all terrific. And of course, your administrators would also like you to be thinking about the tangible support functions. So let's step from that into the governing side and want to kind of take us through a framework to get us thinking there. I had a choice as to whether I should ask Patrick if I could assign a 30-page business school case for a pre-read, or if it do 2-slide case study, and we've gone with the 2-slide version. So you're welcome. So real case up the road from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. My colleagues and I have a whole library of larger than life, seemingly absurd board moments, this one being one of them, that can get us thinking about something I want to explore here, the idea of thinking about governing as different strands of governing, different modes of governing in order to get at the heart of the matter, in order to really deliberate something effectively. So let's start with this little example here. This board found itself some years ago facing this question: should we lend 21 of our Monets to the Bellagio Casino and Hotel Complex in Las Vegas? And just to get us going and thinking about governing, let me ask you, if you were the board of the NFA, this one is about the size of the board of the NFA, I believe. Speaking of large boards, formed to raise money, approach it, you could have life trustees, so no one ever needs to hold them in the checkbooks for as long as they're standing or even sitting in the boardroom. But if we were this board, just to kind of get our heads into this, what question would you want to deliberate in order to come to a judgment as a board on this? Let's just get a few examples. I'll translate rather than one with the mic. Who wants to get us going? Define lens. Do we have a lawyer? We don't know. We have someone who really want, yes, absolutely. What do we mean by that? Yes.
What's the mission statement of the Boston?
What's our mission statement? And yeah, and how does this align with that or support that? That's great. Will we get them back? Yes, and in what condition? Yes. We had a couple of other board members here that I see. Yeah.
You'll have a gambling debt that needs settled. On the board.
You do have to wonder, a nonprofit and a casino make a deal together. Who, I wonder who's going to come out. Yeah.
How does that impact our fiduciary duty, our patrons?
Yes, so how does moving these paintings affect our fiduciary duty to our patrons? Yeah, here in Boston. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this became a very notable case back in the day. And it does get you into thinking how even one medium-sized issue can really call on a board to think in these multiple modes. The first one that kind of many people will go to for good reason is to think about the fiduciary mode of governing. Your job as board members protecting the assets of your organization. Yeah, so will we get them back? Are they travel worthy? I had a client show me once at an art museum in Puerto Rico, and not even in San Juan with a heavy arts and culture, tourism sector, but in a smaller city. And they had a world famous piece of art. And basically the museum survived by sending that art around the world. And this guy, early in his career, traveled with it. And by his account, there is no anxiety like the anxiety of waiting for your $55 million framed piece of art to come out of the cargo hold. You thought you were worried at the Dover carousel waiting for your bag. It's a different word. But all of the things you would want to worry about as a state. What about the insurance? What about the safety? What about the security of displaying the art in a setting like that? What's this going to mean? Curatorial control, and all of this stuff about honoring the letter and the spirit of the law and keeping your assets protected. This is where many of us appropriately will go. And of course, we're going to go further than that. Even in our call out, we got in 3 examples, got to what does this mean for our strategy? And every museum has a strategy, figure out how to give people the experience of art. So to the very question we had there at the end, how's this going to affect attendance back home? Monet's Impressionist collection at NFA being super popular. Is this going to, kind of disappoint our own patrons? What's it going to do if I had kept the question and kept our little simulation going? You would have gone pretty quickly to what's this going to do to our image? Maybe the question of mission alignment gets us to this too. What's this going to do to our image? How is this going to, people knowing that, you know, we're this type of museum, whatever that is, how does that affect our audiences? Are there more deals we can make like this? People snarkily at the time were talking about, oh, would you send them to Disney World? Would you send them on the Love Boat, etc.? What will other museums do in response? So this is all familiar, the idea of thinking, hey, we've got a strategy, or at least we've got a direction. We know where we're trying to go. How will our answer to this question affect our ability to get there? So strategic dimension of boards, very familiar. This third piece, there's always a third surprise piece when a consultant is standing in front of you or a researcher. This is not a surprise. Boards are doing this. My colleagues and I tried to put language and a framework to it, because when we asked boards what it is they were doing when they were most effective, they were often describing this type of what I'll be calling here generative work. So not, are we protecting our assets? Is it on budget? Is it legal? And not, will it get us from point A to point B, where we're thinking in a really kind of analytic way, weighing different paths and possible outcomes. But this stuff being much more about subjective judgment that's trying to help you to get to the heart of the matter, trying to help you make sense of what's really going on before you formulate a path. So very akin to good jumping off point here would be to be thinking about the mission. Although we also know if you've got a really thorny question that you can resolve by referring to your mission, it's probably not that thorny, because most of our missions are pretty comprehensive and they give us a lot of running room. And this is where boards come in. You know, when you could think of yourself like judicial panels or a Supreme Court, where you're really grappling with, okay, we've got the mission. Now we've got this situation or decision. How do we interpret the mission in terms of what's right? So it's about judgment and insight. And here, one of the things at play was just the identity of the institution itself. So, you know, kind of what does it mean to have this mission about being a public or a nonprofit institution, and to have our art displayed with a private dealer, or indeed in Vegas? Does that mean we're conservative? Are we populist? What does this say about us? What will we do for the right price? There was a lot of controversy when this was entertained, and we had MFA trustees then, and I think since then, referring to it as renting the art, to underscore the unsavory transactional nature of this. And then you had other people saying, well, that's actually a very elitist perspective. If our mission is to give people the experience of art and hope it enriches their lives, why wouldn't we send the art to where the people are? And, you know, obviously someone and that they Googled, where are the people going? And found they're going to Vegas. They're not going to pound on the door of NFA. So you get into these deeper questions of who are we? What is this situation, you know, really presenting to us? And even a way of reframing your strategy. So this is generative work often produces just a new sense of the question. The question for most museums is, how do we get people to the art? And that gets you into marketing and communications and pricing and hours and parking. I mean, just all kinds of stuff flows from that implicit strategy of get people to the art. Well, clearly generated a new version of the question. How do we get art to the people? Why don't we just bring the art to where the people actually are? So this is the generative stuff. And I'm going to layer a bit more on it, get into some examples. But we could say for now, it's about using the board's collective wisdom to generate insight into what's going on out there. What is the problem in front of us? What is this opportunity really about? And also generating an understanding of our identity. What's our way of doing this? So let me get these familiar and less familiar modes together for you. So the fiduciary stuff, familiar to all of us, doesn't mean we're all equally proficient or experts in them. But this is the stuff you all know, where you're all about protecting the assets, ensuring compliance, providing oversight. A lot of implicitly what we're doing when we're in the fiduciary mode is trying to figure out if anything's wrong. It's about error detection, not for the sake of playing gotcha, but for the sake of protecting the assets, and that's what audits are. Is anything amiss? Is there anything we need to attend to? So you're really trying to spot the problems, and there are ways to be good at this and ways to be weak at this. And I know you've got the wonderfully named session, keeping your board out of court. So I do encourage some of you to split up and dip into that one. And this, of course, is critically important. One thing to notice about this is that instead of ending up with boards that are really proficient at fiduciary governing, we have ended up designing our boards and board life only around this function. So even if you think about conventional committee structures for boards, they'll often just mirror what the administration or management has. So, administration's dealing with money. So of course we have a finance committee. If you've got a bigger campus or facility, you might have a facilities committee or a buildings and grounds committee. So, we have student life, we'll have student life committee. Each one of those committees really good at providing oversight, keeping track of these key functions in the organization. No complaint there, except to observe that there is more than just keeping tabs on the administration and making sure that things are on course. And very often this structure we have doesn't facilitate that. That's why often when boards really want to think deeply about strategy, it's not just their committee structure that's kind of pulling them toward the fiduciary work that they should be doing. It's also just things like board meetings themselves. The board will often have to cancel a board meeting and have a retreat. We have some real thinking to do, so we can't do the meeting the way we usually do. And what does that tell us about the way we usually have our meetings if they don't commit thinking about strategy? But the strategy stuff also familiar to all of you, not that it is easy to do, but really working together as administration and partnership to figure out where we're going, how do we set the course for getting there, trying to exercise foresight. I think we've all been humbled by that in the last few years. No one had many of what happened in the past 5 years on their board strategy scenario. You're trying to come up with a plan. You're trying to solve the problem. By contrast with that, by the fiduciary stuff, you could imagine relying on a lot of the board's technical skills. So in the no board scenario, we got right away, the idea that boards will often offer depth in financial expertise that might not be in huge supply in a staff. So you could imagine the boards, a lot of that thinking might be technical. Strategy, a lot of that thinking is analytic. Is this course of action better than that one? Let's way to phrase the pros and cons. And it's generative stuff where we're trying to make sense of what's happening out there. We're really relying more on insight. We're trying to find out when we talk about sending the Monets to Bellagio, what are we really talking about? Is it really just about a good financial deal? Is it really about a breakthrough, getting more people to see the art? Or is it really about recasting our identity and becoming something different on behalf of our mission, or is it about all of those things? And in that mode, you're avoiding the problems. The paintings did go to Bellagio, by the way, for those who haven't yet Googled it. I would be like enthusiasm for this question. They did go there. It was hugely successful. And as you could guess, that while the NFA was having these discussions, should we send the paintings? Why would we send the paintings? Bellagio, back in the day when this happened, was having its own generative discussions where they were trying to make sense of their environment, which was increasingly competitive as gambling or gaming, I think they prefer to call it, became legal and more places, what's the rationale for coming to Vegas? So they kind of, as many of you, I'm sure know, trying then to reposition themselves as a family-friendly, cultural and fine dining destination. And so that gets them kind of out of their strategy box, saying, hey, someone call MFA, they've got the most impressionist paintings and those are super popular. So we want to think about all of these. You could also think about those analogies I shared with the beginning too, because the goal here isn't that every board member is going to be equally attracted, equally proficient to each of these modes. We'll probably have a preference individually. The images that might have come to your mind when that analogy slide flashed in front of you might give you a clue where you are. If your image with board is to organization as kind of referee is to team or judge to board, or you may have a fiduciary sense. You may be seeing the board primarily through that lens of kind of compliance and honoring the letter and the spirit of the law. If you had some of the navigational images people often have about rudders and compasses and pilots and air traffic control, you're probably thinking more strategically. And I forget what was on that slide. I'm not sure we had the good generative ones, but we had brain to body. And I had someone in a workshop a while ago offer not brain to body, but mind to brain or soul to brain, kind of getting more into the generative slide. So 2 more slides on this, just to give you hope. But they're doozies now to bring it down. They take a minute to get through, but I wanted to show the relationship between these more familiar, less familiar types of governing to each other, which gets us then into the reality of, okay, how do we do this? What are the dynamics here? So I'm showing here what I'm labeling the generative curve, as you see, and we've got time on the horizontal, which could differ depending on what the issue is. Over on the left, you may be dealing with a leadership succession, time to hire a new head of school. Over on the right, you're shaking hands and unveiling your new leader. Over on the left, it could be time for a new strategic plan, depending on how you do that, how much consultation, et cetera. It could be some months later on the right, you're unveiling it. So this could vary by weeks or months, or it depends what the issue is, what your pace and your metabolism are. And on the horizontal is the opportunity to do this generative work on the high. And all this is really trying to show is that by the time you're in the middle of that, choosing your strategy, hiring your new leader, passing a budget, whatever it is, by the time the board's in the middle, ready to vote, the opportunity to ask, are we really working on the right question? Is it really just about the return from an Bellagio, or is there more to this? So the time to really say, have we made sense of our situation by framing the question properly has passed you by. The time to say, well, what's really going on in our school, in our community, or out there in the world, in the marketplace, however you want to look at it. The time to make sense of that, which in turn informs the strategy you'll choose, has passed you by when you're coming to vote. Reading the signs of the time, kind of making sense, and this is where boards as groups really are an asset. More people with more perspectives, more life experience, more professional lenses, kind of putting together a richer picture that enables you to really find the question or the questions that will matter. So all that stuff's passed you by. And we kind of know this, just in our own experience. It's better to have an imperfect solution to the right problem than a perfect solution to the wrong problem. So someone showed me a student showed me a quote a couple of years ago, an Einstein quote to this point, which is, if I had 60 minutes to solve the problem my life depended on, I'd spend 55 minutes making sure I got the problem right and 5 minutes solving it. So you get the spirit of it. It plays out in all kinds of professions. In medicine, if we have medical professionals, healthcare professionals, and diagnosis momentum. You kind of blow the patient off, you're not spending enough time at the top of that curve, boom, you land on your diagnosis. Down that curve, you go into treatments or execution of the plan, too late to criminal justice, you land on that, that suspect too easily, too quickly, and lock in on that, well, now you're committed downstream to that course. So we know this in a familiar way. By the way, I looked up the Einstein thing, it turns out he didn't say that. And it turns out that 90% of the things on Einstein posters and mugs, he didn't say. But he well could, because it was. But you can see all this, and the point here is not, my proposal, no, you should spend all your time on the top of that curve, pondering what's really going on out there, who are we today, what are our values, we know. It's to spend enough of your time up there to increase the chances that the decisions you make in the middle of that curve will serve you well. And of course, ultimately, you want to get down to the bottom of that curve, where your administrators, your faculty, your staff are actually doing the thing you want to do. So I am not meaning to say all of your good work is at the top of that curve, only that doing good work at the top of that curve can improve your chances for better decisions lower down. So just bringing boards back into it. Look at the generative problem. There's that same curve. Now we've mapped on there this idea of the typical board involvement curve. Make this simple point that very often, when that generative opportunity is at its greatest, the board's involvement is at its lowest. And as that opportunity declines, the board gets more involved. So the board is activated in the middle of that curve because it's time to vote on the budget, strategy, whatever the big thing is. And when the administration and faculty and staff are down at the bottom of that curve, executing, doing things, delivering on the mission, the board's very involved in its oversight role appropriately. Trying to find out, are we actually succeeding at the things we wanted to succeed at? So why is it a problem? It's not a problem because the board's providing oversight because they should. And it's not a problem because the board is active in the middle of the board of that curve making decisions because it should be. Our argument is a problem when they're not involved at the top of the curve, because this is really where some of the most influential opportunity to shape the institution really does lie. It's in those higher curve generative conversations, really where the future is shaped. And you can see this very often if you think of your last budget vote. This is very, very common constraint that board practice has imposed on all of us. But what you'll often see, I took a good example. I went once to my first encounter with a board I was working with, that very interesting board. They were advocates of human rights, generally in democratic, authoritarian countries. And a fascinating board. They have about 25 board members, former diplomats, activists, academics, all kinds of really interesting, smart people. I went to observe a board meeting of theirs. I think we're meeting at that time four times a year, these 8-hour board meetings. You shudder. And just looked at the agenda and see they had budget approval was an item, and they had 20 minutes of the 8 hours allocated. And this is typically how it's done. And I'm also thinking, I like to be chair, I'm also thinking, okay, here's your arguably the most important decision you're going to make this year. And you devoted 20 minutes to it. This is going to be interesting. So we get to the 20-minute things. 11 minutes of it are PowerPoints. The CFO, the COO, treasurer makes some comments, followed by, are there any questions? Which really means don't ask any questions. And you have 25 really intelligent people. So okay, we have 9 minutes, 25 of us, $40 million budget. This thing is obviously cooked. And you had someone then ask, okay, how much, go back to the donated revenue side, how much of that comes from individual donors? Director of advancements in the room gives an answer. Okay, and another intelligent board member, probably some former Assistant Secretary of State, and how much of that comes in off the website? So no, someone's like texting the back room, how much comes in, okay, find out, you're wondering like, where is this conversation going? And then someone asks incisively, and what credit cards do we accept on the website? And you're just watching the full folly of a board becoming stupid, like, why are these 25 people? They literally begin debating whether Amex commission transaction charges were too high, and just thought, wow, there's a lot of work to do here. But in fact, what they were doing is very familiar, because in fact, too many boards are engaged on big issues at the 11th hour. When a few things are happening. One is, there's no genuine opportunity to really dig. Who's going to dig? I'd like to dig into the key assumptions behind the budget. The fiscal year starts in like 9 days. No one's going to do that. I'd like to challenge the work of my colleagues on the budget committee. That's not going to happen often. And when it does, it's considered almost a crisis in many boardrooms. So you're going to get people saying, hey, we've got a great CEO, a great team, and these people on the finance committee, they're good. Just everyone vote yes for it. No, so this board on a second go round did it differently. They came forward months ahead of the budget and said, the budget's going to be with the budget annual. A bunch of it is just personnel anyway. There aren't that many moving parts to it, but we have 3 things that are going to make or break the budget. And I forget what 2 of them were, but one of them was costs. And what they did months in advance of the budget was just ask the board, not what should we do, or a tier board of 25, let's build a budget together in real time. They just asked high on that curve, as we try to grapple with this question of managing healthcare costs, what question do you want us to worry about? That was it. What questions should management and the finance committee be thinking about? And they got, they spent only probably 20 minutes on it. And they really got into it. They got into all the good fiduciary questions you would want to think about. What are we required to offer? They had some unionized workforce with the contracts require, that said all of that. They have great strategic questions. Every organization wants to recruit and retain the best workers. So the board's like, show us, how does non-financial compensation with benefits and healthcare affects that? And where are we relative to all good strategic things? I think the finance committee management would have done that anyway. Then they got into the generative code, which was more about not is it legal, not can we afford it. It was just much more about, okay, what does this say about us? And it was pretty quickly like, okay, wait, we're a human rights organization on dignity of the worker. This is what we're kind of trumpeting all over the world. Why are we balancing the budget on the backs of our employees' healthcare? Do we really want to participate? What they were calling race to the bottom, et cetera, et cetera. So they got deeply into that. They got deeply or invited management and the finance committee. What motivates our people anyway? Not just like let's jack up the benefits a little bit more, but what is it like to work here? What makes it rewarding? So, 20 minutes of that budget committee went away. They came back. I think they allocated a full half hour the next go round. But the board had already done some of its most critical work just by naming the questions. Not all of those questions were like rocket science. Like management probably would have thought about some of them. Some of them might have been surprises. Critically, some of us in the administrators here gives you great political intelligence, like, just to know, is there a third rail attached to this? Better to know early than when you're putting the $40 million budget on the table. So you could play that scenario out over many different issues. And if you were to like fast forward through, kind of a series of little movie scenes of your board life, you would often see these moments where the board is engaged only in the middle of that curve and actually not adding much value, really just in a kind of more passive, gratifying stance or mode. And that's what I'm encouraging you to try to avoid. It's not about doing more work necessarily, it's about being more thoughtful in some of the work that you're doing. And so last thing to say about this, and I want to open this up for some questions, and then we're going to get into practice over that, is to think about, hey, are boards suited for this work? In our experience, both observing boards when they're doing well and when they're struggling, and thinking this through and talking to trustees and their professional leaders, is that this high curve work, although not the only proper work of the board, really is good work for boards. One reason I already mentioned, groups. More people looking at this thing from more angles, putting together a better picture. This is a good use of groups. In fact, the lower you go on this curve, the harder it can be to govern in a group. So this work is really good for groups. The second thing is this work is generally accessible to board members. This is not the type of work that requires you to know the same things that your head of school knows, or your school administrator, or your faculty know, because you're asking a prior set of deeper, broader questions. It's not about expertise. So if, Bellagio would say the MFA was going to vote in the middle of that curve in June, and they were in March, first encountering this question high on the curve, you wouldn't have to know anything about Monet to be really, but you wouldn't have to be an art historian. You wouldn't have to understand what it means to be a curator or, museum administrator. You don't have to understand any of that to get to these questions of, will they be safe? This doesn't smell right. Let's stop and think about what it means to make a deal with this casino. These are all questions that are very accessible. They turn more, as I said earlier, on insight than expertise. Not that expertise shouldn't be welcome and sought after in the boardroom. So good for groups, they're accessible. Third thing is they are engaging. And they're engaging because they're consequential. Because if you really do this work right, it's not just meeting in a retreat and saying, who are we, and what's going on out there. It's not that. It's sitting together and saying, we're going to be making a decision later in the middle of this curve. What do we need to think about? It's in service to real consequential questions that will really affect the future of the institution. And participating in that type of work is engaging. And what we see repeatedly is boards that have more access to these deeper, consequential, influential questions lean in more. They actually work harder. They feel more rewarded. They feel their work is more gratifying because they see that it shapes the important decisions that follow, and that they're really working together to set the course for the institution. So for all these reasons, we'd encourage you to think about it. And again, not presume that any of this is novel. I mean, boards really are doing this. Often they're doing it in spite of the way they are organized and structured and usually do their meetings. And it's kind of, jammed in sideways, or it erupts and it feels really, wow, that was a great meeting. One knew, how did that happen? It's serendipitous. And so the practice implications we can get to are really just taking the mystery out of it. Okay, how will you organize yourselves, your committees, your meetings, your workflow to get at this? So I'll pause here on the high theory. That's been quite a tour. Now, let me just open this up for questions about what's in play now so far, or reactions to this, and then I'll lead us down a couple more paths. Yes. Mike Corning.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate the comments. So my question is related to the concept of spending time as a board, as a group of collective trustees in generative thinking, ways to, especially during a strategic planning, right, visioning process, ways to kind of manage sense or signals that, or just natural feelings of a lack of patience on some, but also understanding what are the signals that let you know you've spent enough time in general thought, right? So what's that?
Yeah, great questions. By the way, if you are starting strategic planning, types of high curve things the whole board might be engaged in before it hands the work off to a task force, that we have the administrators and maybe some board members on, will be just what's different today from when we did our last plan. I mean, just simple question. What are the longest questions you ought to be thinking about? So not popping up with answers and new strategies, but just generating questions. So to your questions about what are the signals that, how do you deal with the impatience some people may have here, and how do you know when you're complete with this work? So I will say people will become impatient with this if it's untethered. If it is just kind of blue sky thinking, or, oh, I've got a juicy, kind of generative question for you to reflect on and mull, that will tire some people out. If, by contrast, that work is connected to a real question, who is the right head of school to succeed our current leader? What is the right way to resolve this really difficult budget jam we're in? Should we make a move to buy this adjacent property, which will involve some debt and some risk? If the high curve work is tethered to real questions, people are much less likely to become impatient with it and much more likely to see the value of it. But if it's kind of untethered today, I'd like to talk to you about our mission. It's probably going to be perceived as potentially low value. How do you know you're complete? There are two ways to do this. One, you're just sweeping up the input of the full board, like as a net budget example. Like it's simply asking, what are the questions the finance committee and management ought to ask about the healthcare benefits? That's it. So really, that's a light lift. Just brainstorm it, hear them. That smaller group carries all of that out of the room and tries to figure out, wait, is there a center of gravity here? Is it a priority? So, so that's easy. If it's a make or break issue, you're really at your decision moment, what you would have to do is uncover those issues and work through them together as a board, literally, until you find out, for example, it could be something about criteria. We'll buy the adjacent property if it satisfies these criteria, decision-making criteria. And you actually want to get agreement on those criteria right then in that room, because someone's got to go make a deal or say pass. So keep it tethered to a real decision. Be comfortable with scooping up generative input and taking it out of the room. Doesn't take a lot of time. And then third is when the decision has landed in front of you and you've really got to make it, then that does imply you've got to keep working until you get through identifying the key questions and grappling with them. Yeah, and a lot of people, by the way, for a lot of board members implicitly have as a marker of productivity how many decisions do we make, how many votes are we taking. So it's all about the productivity of the decision making, and this is, and that's fine if you want that as your metric, but I want to have another metric, which is something that's about how thoughtful were you in preparing to make that decision. That's the one I think is for the time. Let's get a few more questions. I'll make answers shorter. Now you're all very frightened to ask a question.
Thanks. I'm curious about the board's role in assessing a decision after it's been made and executed, and if there are generative models to that as opposed to.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, and often, some of you have dashboards and they're usually populated. The great thing about dashboards for keeping track of your key metrics is you have things you can measure. enrollment and admissions and finances, those attach nicely to numbers and you can get a quick picture. What boards tend to do much less often is say they made a decision that's just not so easily converted into a dashboard. We want to promote more parent engagement in school, or we want to be more inclusive, or we want to try this new strategy for promoting community service. Yeah. Whatever it may be. What doesn't happen and what could happen is simple reflection on how that went. To be able to say a year later, 18 months later, hey, remember, we were at the top of that curve and we decided this was important. And then in the middle, we voted on it and spent some money and people worked hard on it. What often is lacking is, well, what happened? And it can be as simple as any of you with a military background will know after action reviews. Used widely in the corporate sector as well, which is simply sit down after the military action or after whatever the school has done. Say, what were we trying to get done? What happened? And what do we make of it? And actually just think that through, not for the purpose of judging the administration or the committee, but really for making sense of what do we want out of this and how are we going to do it differently. And boards are often engaged in that type of learning, even though it can be really productive. So I would think if it's not easily amenable to numbers and tracking a before and after picture, it could be from dialogue. And you could have your head of school, a couple of senior leaders, whoever's got insight into it, talking through a couple of case studies, reflecting together. Most importantly, saying, okay, what are the implications going forward? So much more active type of learning and discernment. That's not, it's not about rendering judgment, it's about making things better. Yeah. And then at the end of this session, we'll check my steps. Oh, my phone is on the table. This is all for naught. And walking around the room. Okay.
Do you have a view of the skill sets that should be part of any board? It's a group process, and we could all look at any sports team and say, oh, they don't have the right skills, they don't have any skill players, whatever. It would be for
That's a great question. And yeah, so I would go when we go to skills. I want to broaden it out. But when you go to skills, first and foremost, what's the expertise we need to go? And this is why we heard from our first head of school. This is why people often go to finance is the first go-to, because we are fiduciaries. We need to understand, and when we talk about protecting assets on behalf of the mission, it's money often. And so you need to understand that and you need as a board to, so finance is without a doubt going to be important for the audit function, for the financial planning function, etc. Legal, you might want to make sure you got a couple of lawyers, never more than two. No, as many as you might. But that's good, for contracts, for understand, for having a sensitivity, not being paranoid, but a sensitivity to liability, risk exposure, things like that. Those are on there. Then what happens after that point is people will then go into skills needed to run the organization. So it's, oh, it would be good to have some marketing people, it would be good to, maybe some real estate people. So kind of anything that management deals with, maybe we want someone on the board. But notice that's a different logic. Let's get these skills so we can backstop the administration if they're light on those skills. So I would make first and foremost skills we need to govern. Second could be skills we need to help management. Very, very tricky territory. And often a mistake we make is we're so focused on hard skills in board recruiting that when we get new board members in, they think they're there to be experts. And they're kind of waiting for their territory. Oh, finally a finance issue, or I see a legal risk that we've got a contract I can write in. And you want people bringing skills to the table, expertise to the table, but that's not all they're there for. And hence the three panels on those. So I would say those are important. Now, I'm just to round it out a little further, just one thing I'd make a pitch, as you're recruiting, because often the recruiting pitch for prospective board members is, hey, they know the institution, the schools, the school, you have kids here, you're the mom, whatever it may be. It's a great school. Would you help and join the board? Understandably, and you want to pitch the mission and the institution. One thing I would just say is it won't take much of your time. First, it's a lie. Second, it's signaling exactly the wrong thing. You can phone it in. No, not to worry about it. So better if you're able to say, hey, you know how great the school is and the mission. If you can pair that with, hey, here are some of the big decisions we've grappled with as a board in the past few years, or here's the type of thing we're going to be called on as a board to figure out. That's also seeing people in there, not just here to give free consulting on your day job skills. You're here to help us think. So I encourage that. And to the extent that you can say, board service is engaging or rewarding, or if you're going to make it that way, better still. But yeah, and then just the hazard on the skills too is when you've got board members helping the administration by contributing their day job skills on a management, it just gets just for board members, everyone to be aware of that. I had a case recently of a public media, like a public radio, TV, podcast operation, and so they cut a lot of deals with on-air talent, and the board has like talent agents and entertainment lawyers on it. And one of them was advising a VP who was negotiating with some podcast star and about how to structure the deal. And the VP, the staff person, was telling me that the trustee, who was really acting as a free consultant to her, not as her boss, he was no longer in a trustee role, was actually kind of telling her what to do. And in fact, it should have been the other way around. In that situation, the VP is the boss, the client, and the board member. So just the awareness of, wait, is this a board job I'm doing right here, or am I doing a side gig? Because it can be very hard for administrators to say, oh, thank you, you're renowned in your profession. Thank you for your input. I don't care to take it. We're going to do that. So anyway, just to have awareness of all of that, and to think about how you're pitching for board service. And if you can't promise it'll be interesting and engaging, what can you do to make it so? Let's do a couple more questions before we dig into some more practice stuff. Yes.
When you speak of the board becoming engaged in the work, what's your advice on committees? Because I find that that's where they can get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
Maybe dirty is a bad
Yeah, no, exactly. Roll up their sleeves, got their hands dirty, whatever you like, right? Yeah, you know what? I thought someone would ask that, and I brought along 45 slides. No. I have not. Oh, looking back to the numbering. Well, this stuff is all really good. Yeah, just and only 2 slides. I would show you just to think expansively about committees, right? So committee structure, when we think about committees, this is usually where we go, do we have the right committees? Should audit be separate from finance? That's all good, the org chart, and that's accessible. You usually kind of know what you need. Not that hard to figure out. The 2 other dimensions are the ones we tend to look, and there's a lot of how at them. One is how is the full board, and how do the full board and the committees interact, which is, I think, maybe where your question might take us. And then 2 is how can each committee work effectively? And I'll just say, here's the question that I'll give as the answer to your question. When you think about boards and committees, are the committees driving the board, or is the board driving the committees? And very often, committees are driving the board. And board meetings are an assortment of committee reports that are kind of siloed, by function, because committees have a discrete function, each of them doing their work. They don't necessarily have to each other. They're, they don't necessarily give the board the enterprise-wide view. You're just, now we dip into facilities, and here's a quick look at finances, whatever your committees may be. And so really what I would offer is switching this so that the board is driving the committees. And you'll know it's not, this is what you say, get your hands dirty, right, in committees. So often what we'll hear the people, so when we interview board members and engage, and so, oh, the real work of the board is in committees. Which does raise the question, what adjective would describe the work of the board if it's not real? What is this? And it's often perfunctory, 11th hour, ratifying it, etc. Another sign would be the board meetings themselves. They're very committee report driven. And if committees service is routinely, predictably more interesting than your experiences with the full board, this is all a sign that the committees are driving the board. And in the worst extremes, the full board almost becomes a bystander. It's just not, it's not greater than the sum of its parts at all. And that can make the board really passive, just reactive, ratifying, make very siloed. And you can also have committees not connected to the interests of the board, just trying to figure out, wait, what should we be doing here once you get on finance and audit, which has scripts that you can reliably use year after year, it can get so how would you switch that around? I would say to put the board back in charge, set some priorities for the year. Some of them are no-brainers because you got to do them every year. Some of them might be novel. This is the year we're really gonna look at issue X, deferred maintenance, whatever. Then board leadership assigning those tasks. Hey, we said we have these 3 big goals about deferred maintenance and diversity and something else. Kind of we want your committee to kind of figure out what's your piece of these big questions, factor it into your thinking. And some committees, their work won't be influenced by the board goals in a given year. That's fine. And then each committee making its own work plan, partly by reference to what the board goals are. And then here is the key point buried in the board on slide 2 to 10. Getting into the habit of having the committees consult the full board before they bring a proposal forward. So to go back to that code, there are kind of different ways to kick that off. Often it's a head of school or CEO or whatever at the top of the code comes in and says, we've got a big decision coming down the pike. In May, we're going to make it. And so today I want you to be my thought partner and generate these questions. A committee can do the same thing. So we're dealing right now in my consulting practice with a very convoluted board. It's 50 people and 2 bodies, et cetera. And they just, there's a sense by a lot of them that they need to rip it all down and start over. And a few of them know what the correct answer should be, and they're probably right. But what they will be better served by doing is not just popping up in the middle of the code, saying, okay, we just need to shed 30 board members, any volunteers. Or, oh, we're just going to get rid of our 75 years of board tradition and start fresh. No, what they could have done was have the committee consult the full board early on, which is, hey, whatever changes we want to make, what must we not lose? What parts of ourselves and our culture must be preserved? Or, a few questions like that a committee can pose to the full board, even on something as like inside baseball, as how the board is organized by a governance committee, can be a really productive use of time. So then when the committee is coming back, putting a proposal on the table to shed 30 board members and upend all their traditions, the board's been consulted. So a head of school can kick off the hyper work, a committee can do it. And when a committee does it, this is when you really have the committee working in sort of and then board leadership, if you have an executive committee, you can use that committee or use the board chair and vice chair, however you want to organize your work, to just coordinate the work of all your committees. And then the last thing, and it's not rocket science, same thing, just each committee having a plan. What do our fiduciary obligations require us to do this year? You know, for some of you, it's clear, you gotta get the audit done and file it. What does the current strategic plan require us to do? Third one, you're gonna be sitting in the committee with an administrator, if not the head of school. Hey, administrator, staff partner, what do you need from us? What would be useful? And then finally, the point we just covered, when do we want to consult the board? Yeah, that'll teach you for asking. Was any of that responsive to your question? That's like a freedom of information request answer. I'd like these 10 emails and I bring a truck. Maybe you'll find the email you want to get. Okay. Let's take one more question and then I want to do a little bit of table conversation. We have it's great enough to ask one more question. Yes.
So beginning, yeah, getting to the generative sort of model. Who takes leadership on that board or CEO of the organization?
Yeah. So yeah,
Yes.
great question. Who takes leadership? So it can be, first of all, you've got to be on the same page. So decide how to do it. Although I will say this, you know, none of this is but if you strip away the curves, jargon, generative, you know, just all of that, it's always within the purview. Might not be in the board's tradition or habits. It's always appropriate for a head of school, for example, to come into the boardroom and say, I want to get your thinking on this big issue before I bake that cake, and come back later with a fully formed proposal. So I don't want to make this seem stay sage, novel, or mysterious. This is all, we're putting some language to it so we can say, how would we do more of it? How would we do it better? But so I would say two ways. Who has ownership? The group should decide. What kind of board do we want to be? What kind of stuff do we want to work on? And that could be as simple as a boardroom conversation about, you know, kind of what's the most meaningful work we've done before in the last couple of years? What does that tell us about where we are focused? So obviously getting a shared sense of it by both the administration and the board is critical. But I will say it's really the heads of school. It's the CEOs who can drive this. Because in order to do this, you need to have the table set. So it's not head of school alone, head of school with the chair, whoever sets your agendas. And the way to set the table is generally through meetings. And the way to lead a board through meetings more to this type of work is, as I said, to get beyond the, are there any questions? To, okay, are there any questions about what was just presented? Of course, you want to ask that so people are clear. And also, here's the question for you. So if there's no question on the table, you're leaving it to chance as to whether there'll be any real discussion. So this is where there's a whole craft for heads of school, like how do I find an appropriate question, right altitude for the board to put on the table so they can engage with that. And then for the board to accept, hey, in each of our meetings, probably going to have a half hour that's not just marching through committee reports, half hour or more, we're just going to focus on one thing. So I would say, although both need to own it, it really takes a CEO, a head of school, who's interested in doing it and comfortable putting questions on the table for the board. And I would say to the heads of school, usually CEOs would feel instinctively if I were to go through this whole quote thing with them. You know, like, ooh, that just feels scary at the top of it, or to bring my board in there. I don't know about that. I don't know if they know enough. I don't know if they're tuned in enough. Like, never. So I'll do it at the middle of the book. And of course, what they're unwittingly doing is kind of keeping the board in a ratifying mode. And once they experiment with bringing questions at the top of the curve, they're never about tell me what to do. They're just really about tell me the types of things you think I want to worry about, think about, ask myself. You find out it's actually not that mistake. It's not likely or off at all. So let's do this. I've got a couple more things I want to cover. I do want to turn the fire hose off for a moment, take a few moments in your tables just to think about what are you seeing about your own board life in light of what we've covered so far, just to kind of compare notes. What I encourage everyone to do, I know some of you are here with partners from home. Many of you, of course, have board colleagues at home. Just to, after you're taking in the whole workshop, make a date for yourselves, just kind of be 15 minutes at the beginning of your next Zoom encounter to say, hey, what did we take away from the workshop? What are the 1 or 2 questions we want to get the board thinking about? So we'll start that now. Just let's take 5 minutes, just at tables. What are you seeing about your own board? It could be either, oh, that's putting language to the thing we love doing when we do it well, or, oh, that's showing me why we're maybe underperforming in this way or that. So take a few minutes at tables just to digest, make a bit of sense of what you're hearing, and then we'll come up for air, and I want to share a couple more things. let's get a quick feel for what people were seeing about their boards. Or for conversation sounded lighthearted, I assume you weren't really talking about your boards or whatever. You can reflect on those. Yeah. Anyone want to share out just so we can get a flavor of what's bubbling? What are you seeing about your boards? Got a couple of examples. There was a black board. Yes, I'm coming toward you with yeah, no, that's okay.
So we were just talking about how hard it is for our nominating committees, finding board members, especially in the sense when we have a number of board members coming off, who are doing a lot of the work and how to replace their, not only their expertise, but their commitment, mission to school.
Yeah, so recruiting, huge problem. And many people have had enough exposure to what's disappointing about boards to be on guard when they're approached. That's why my earlier point, to the extent you can offer the promise of interesting work, consequential work, it would give you a competitive edge, trying to get people to commit their time. The other thing I'm seeing done quite well, and many of you probably do with some version, is just kind of hook people in for an assignment. You know, oh, okay, you can't be on, okay, would you be willing to be on this task force, or, you know, something like that, and see if you can develop, nurture their interests. But yeah, for sure, commitment is part of it. There's another piece of the puzzle with recruiting is a challenge. Another piece of that too is already the right size. Are you recruiting for a board that's bigger than what you actually need? You know, and that's a whole design question. Yeah, let's get a couple of other responses. What else were people worrying about or celebrating with your boards and those conversations? Into this back table, so you can work telepathically.
We talked a little bit about the role of administration and the role of the board. And I didn't get a chance to say this, but Sal Linsky in community organizing talks about never have a meeting that doesn't make a difference if you came. So just talking, not making any decisions, that does not lead to an effective board. And then the opposite, just making a lot of decisions but not really discussing them, that doesn't make anything. So it's also about community organizing.
Yeah, love that. Love that. That's a great handle to think about. I once asked a group of CEOs. We were in a kind of 2-day workshop setting. They had brought a bunch of their board agendas to look at. And we were going to kind of, what does that tell you about your board? And one of them raised her hand. She said, well, I looked through these and I put myself in my board members' positions. And I thought, what would I be thinking getting on a plane to go to this meeting or getting into the car to go to this meeting? And I concluded I would be praying I would have an appendicitis attack. But it's whatever that standard is, whether it's that great Saul Alinsky point to make it matter. And look, the other thing is you also have to be compassionate with yourself. Some of what boards need to do isn't going to get the dopamine flowing. Sometimes you just have to do this stuff and you just have to do it and do it well and be painstaking. But I think every board meeting should have some contact and some opportunity for discussion about something that matters, hopefully framed in a way where it can make a difference. Yeah, let's get one more reaction and then I'll hit you with a couple of last things. I also was just talking to Patrick. Can I ask you to pass that to the colleague? I will also, by the way, send along via Patrick, just a little bit more how to on some of this stuff, 1 or 2 page cheat sheets on various things. Yeah, please.
Hi, we were talking about how schools within our network can be culturally, racially, ethnically, socioeconomically different from each other, and what that means for the ways that we go about forming and developing and maintaining a board. Sometimes the things that are working for one school are not working for another.
Yeah, and that would be the last word. It's a great last word. So you can just leave the mic there, save me 20 steps. And it actually is, it's a great thought because it ties into a last meta thought I wanted to get into. We've talked about the two types of board values, supporting and governing, really been drilling into the governing side. And on that side, focused on this kind of generative stuff, not because it's most important, but because it's often neglected. And we've covered some ground with recruiting and meetings and committees and the like. And there are 101 board design and operation questions that require you to think about what's the right way for us to design and operate our board. And it gets to the comment we just heard. What's right for one board, given its situation, its culture, its makeup, is not going to be right for another. And so I would offer, just as macro parting advice, the idea that thinking about these questions in terms of choices, what's the best choice for us, is almost always going to be better than trying to find the best practice. And that the best choices that support a culture of inquiry are kind of I would say the best choices. And I use best practice, and the other presenters here probably do too as well, as a term of convenience. And it kind of means what's the consensus nowadays in our field. Unlike best practices in medicine, for example, there's almost no evidence base for it. And what has happened, I think, with nonprofit boards, I'm going to make a macro plea here, preaching to the converted, we've just gotten caught up with the search for best practices, and we have washed out of our boardrooms all of the individuality, the personality, the distinctiveness, whether it's because of their mission, their culture, their socioeconomic situation, whatever it may be. Boards have all come to look alike. And there's an explanation in the research on this question about why do organizations look so much alike. And the answer is not they all do it the same way because that's what works. It's much more sobering and interesting than that. It's we don't really know what works. Therefore, we do it the same way because at least everyone else is doing it that way, and we won't be embarrassed. And I think this is what's going on in boards. We are just grabbing templates instead of saying, wow, this could be a site for us to figure out what should it look like with our distinctive mission, our culture, in the context of this meeting, our campus. What should our board meeting look like? Instead, what we get is, just mass produce this charmer here. This is Henry Robert, who created Robert's Rules of Order, which is like governs most of American nonprofit life. At least when it comes to can I have a second, even if you're not using them in a straight, even if you don't have a parliamentarian. And we tend to treat it as like physics. Well, that's how boards won. Those rules were the product of this guy's mind. He was a military engineer. He worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in the 19th century, retired, got involved in like civic and community life, got a huge migraine going to these church meetings and the town hall is here in New England. So I can't stand the chaos. They're talking over each other, created Robert's Rules of Order, which reflects the mind of a military engineer. They anticipate every single scenario that could conceivably, I have the 1896 version. It's got a fold out panel, like a 20-foot long thing of, and I don't need to goof on it because they're great. What he's really trying to do is balance efficiency with due process. And it's wonderful, and he's a genius in his way, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's why I brought George Fox. founder of the Quakers. So Henry Robert is all about, you only have, this is why one of the versions of the book someone gave me, I was noticing in his intro, it says, you only need memorize the 30 basic rules of precedence. Just memorize the first 30 and you can look the rest of, So of course, it doesn't have to be that way. Quaker board meetings aren't that way, right? So a Quaker tenet, if you don't know by the lingo, kind of we're all familiar with their vibe, kind of the letter kill it and the spirit given. So if you ever go to a Quaker board meeting, they have some of the same recruiting challenges you do. And I noticed in the Den's formation sector, there aren't enough Quakers to govern Quaker schools, so they're trying to figure out how to transmit the culture. But they all govern in those board meetings the way they worship. It feels like a Quaker board meeting. It's not all about next moving. It's about waiting to be guided, not to argue and win a point, but just to have a point to offer the group. It's a very different and deep way of thinking about the way they do their work together. We have in our nonprofit sector the freedom to give our boards whatever character we want. There are many different ways to be a good fiduciary, to be strategically savvy. So I would make that pitch to you too, as you're thinking about what's the right committee structure, all of these engineering issues and best practice issues, really to be saying, kind of what would our way of doing this be? And create a little bit of space to keep that open, because the more you can connect your board work to what inspires and animates your mission and your community, both religious and lay, the more authentic that's going to be. And I think that's what our sector broadly in the U.S. could use, and I think that's what serves many institutions well. So I will end with that macro plea. I'll put together some resources and also send along the slides from today and ask Patrick to share those out. And just wish you well in your governing and your leading and your leading while you're governed by your boards. And thank you again for a chance to come. Thank you.